So Michele Tafoya criticized Mina Kimes for her take about Tim Walz and masculinity that he's portraying and how it's
new
refreshing.
kind of masculinity.
Yes, and how it's refreshing.
New age masculinity.
And then awful announcing ripped Michele Tafoya for getting after Mina Kimes.
That's exactly the way this thing goes down, right? So Awful Announcing has a story out that says Michele Tafoya criticizes Mina Kimes over Tim Walz's masculinity. One excerpt from that story, by the way, I want to read quickly. Story written by Ben Axelrod says that Michele Tafoya has, quote, drifted to the outer edges of right-wing culture, whatever that means. So this is a story that gets liberal and left-leaning people very excited when they see someone criticizing or attacking someone on the right, like Michele Tafoya, who is definitely a conservative and says that, and hosts a conservative podcast now after leaving NBC Sunday Night Football 2 years ago. That prompts Alex Kirshner, who is a college football writer, podcaster, to post the following, which you can put on the screen. And he says, give this to Michele. She made her career change for the love of the game. Had the 1A best job in sideline reporting, NBC Sunday Night Football, and rolled out to become the 234th most prominent conservative podcast personality. Now, Alex Kirshner is very left, and if you follow him on Twitter, you'll see that he's very left. That's fine. I don't care. He can be left, he can be right, he can be libertarian, he can be communist. I don't really care. He's a college football writer. I've seen some of his stuff. It's pretty good. I got no big issue with Alex Kirshner on any of that. But I do take issue with this general idea that if you want to do something on the right, then suddenly you can't do anything down the middle. So I posted this on X in response to Alex Kirshner. So Mina Kimes gets to air political opinions and keep a high-profile job, but Michele Tafoya can't do the same. She had to leave Sunday Night Football to be a conservative. I'm not for either person losing their job or not being able to work based on their political leanings. The idea that someone must give up their careers to be a conservative commentator, to me, is just insane. Okay, Alex Kirshner then responds to that and says, are there a lot of left-wing podcast hosts who hold down sideline reporting jobs for NFL broadcast partners, or are you making up something to be mad at? Now, I've got plenty of examples of very mainstream sports media people, Alex, that in fact do just that. They may not host a left-leaning podcast, but they sure as hell will be a guest on one and say a lot of left-leaning things. And for many of these people, they don't have to go on a podcast to do it and not face any repercussions. They go on their own network and do it. Michele Tafoya never did that on NBC Sunday Night Football that I saw. Never held a moment of silence for some made-up don't say gay bill that really was not what it was about or what it was portrayed to be in the news media. Well, that's exactly what Courtney Lyle and Carolyn Peck did on ESPN. Enjoy, Alex.
Courtney Lyle, Carolyn Peck. Now, normally at this time, we would take a look back at the first half, but there are things bigger than basketball that need to be addressed at this time. Our friends, our family, our coworkers, the players and coaches in our community are hurting right now. And at 3 o'clock, about 8 minutes ago, our LGBTQIA plus teammates at Disney asked for our solidarity and support, including our company's support, in opposition to the parental rights in education bill in the state of Florida and similar legislation across the United States.
And a threat to any human rights is a threat to all human rights. And at this time, Courtney and I, we're going to take a pause from our broadcast to show our love and support for our friends, our families, and our colleagues.
So again, no punishment, nothing. Moment of silence for a very left-leaning cause. I think everyone would agree with that,
and
with both of them.
Yeah.
Yes. So then another example, L. Duncan wanted to tell everyone the true meaning of being a girl dad and implored all girl dads out there to make sure that you're supporting your daughter's right to get an abortion. Here's L. Duncan on ESPN.
And if I'm being honest, the legacy of Girl Dad has always been incredibly complicated for me, because they were Kobe's words and ultimately I was only sharing them in the wake of unspeakable tragedy, but also Because over time, what started as a touching tribute to the bond between fathers and daughters has turned mostly into a kitschy, commercialized catchphrase. I know you've seen the t-shirts. I certainly see the hashtags. You know, you're playing catch in the yard, hashtag girl dad. Father's Day pics, hashtag girl dad. Literally any content with a girl in it, girl dad. But strip girls of their constitutional rights, silence. I want the dads watching to ask themselves a really honest question right now, and I mean that. How does the sentiment of being a girl dad evolve beyond superficial social media posts into actual advocacy? Are you carrying that same pride for your daughters into boardrooms, locker rooms, courtrooms? Are you doing everything in your power to protect their rights? Do you trust them to make difficult decisions for themselves and their bodies? Should they be given full agency over their own lives? Can you confidently state to the women in your lives that you've used your power and privilege as men for their betterment? That you've done all you can to ensure that at the very least, they'll have the same rights afforded to decades of women before them? I had a friend the other day tell me that I was fearless. It is quite the opposite. I am filled with fear. But this is not a fire drill, and so I'm going to keep speaking up, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it means saying goodbye to my mentions, even if it alienates me from a faction of the public. I don't know if anything that I am doing will help, but I'm trying. And I suppose that all I'm asking to all of you well-meaning, proud girl dads out there is, are you?
I actually am a girl dad of two, and I'm here to inform Elle Duncan that protecting my daughter's rights to get an abortion is way down the list of priorities of what I want for their lives, and way down the list of things I worry about for them every single day. Sorry, Elle, but not sorry. I am a girl dad, and your lecture falls on deaf ears here because I completely disagree with you on everything that you said. Now, if that was a right-leaning rant on ESPN, probably would have been suspended like Sage Steele was for going on an outside podcast and saying right-leaning things. It's the hypocrisy of it that kills me. Here's one other example, Alex, since you asked for examples of people who kept their job in mainstream media. Malika Andrews, she's on NBA draft coverage. She does a lot of things with the NBA. Here is Malika Andrews on Roe versus Wade, also much like Elle Duncan.
Yesterday, the sports world celebrated the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which bans discrimination based on gender in education, including sports. But today, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, declaring that the constitutional right to abortion, upheld for nearly a half century, no longer exists. In less than 24 hours, we celebrated equal rights for women, and now we react to women's reproductive rights being taken away. Sue Bird tweeted gutted in response to the news, and LeBron James retweeted former President Barack Obama, including this: today, the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. Josh Hart wrote, to the women in this country, I'm sorry. The Seattle Storm tweeted in part, people have won the freedom to buy guns with impunity while women have lost the freedom to decide their own future. And lastly, the WNBA issued a statement along with this tweet. This ruling provides a treacherous pathway to abortion bans that reinforce economic, social, and political inequalities and could lead to higher rates of maternal mortality while eviscerating rights to reproductive freedom for everyone. Hashtag bans off our bodies.
Now, I didn't go back and look at Alex Kirshner's Twitter account or X account and see how he responded to those videos. I'm willing to bet either he didn't respond or he reposted them and he probably applauded these women for their bravery or said something very kind about them. And these women mostly were applauded for their bravery in media circles. But nothing happened to them. There were no consequences for their job. They weren't suspended. ESPN did nothing to them. They continued to do their job. Sage Steele answered questions about vaccines on Jay Cutler's podcast and got suspended and eventually out of a job. Michele Tafoya, if you want to talk about bravery, you can agree or disagree with Michele Tafoya. She left one of the top jobs in the NFL 2 years ago. Left one of the top jobs in the NFL, sideline reporter on the highest rated television program of the year on Sunday Night Football, because she's a true believer in what she believes in, and she wanted to go work in conservative media. Now, you can laugh at that decision or do whatever you want, criticize it, whatever, if you're Alex Kirshner or anyone else. But that's bravery, to take a big leap and decide I'm leaving this thing that pays me a lot of money and I'm doing very well in to go do something I truly believe in. Okay? I'm not an overly political person. But what I am is someone who hates hypocrisy in all of this. And here are the basic facts. Making fun of conservatives is mainstream. Making fun of liberals means that you belong on the, let me quote it, outer edges of right-wing culture. Because when Michele Tafoya makes fun of Mina Kimes, she's on the outer edges of right-wing culture. When Alex Kirshner makes fun of Michele Tafoya, it's par for the course. It is mainstream media. It is exactly what I'm saying it is right now, until I step up and repost him and say something about it. I'm tired of the hypocrisy. I don't want any of these people to lose their job over any of this. I think what ESPN has done by telling people not to get political is smart. But let's not act like the playing field is equal when it comes to these ideas either.
Well, it's as equal as it's been at ESPN when you factor in Pat McAfee, Stephen A. Smith on his podcast, went after Kamala Harris for being silent for the last 3.5 weeks and not hearing anything there. And Clay even posted about that on his Instagram account, I believe. You've got Dana White as a guest discussing Donald Trump. And Kirk Herbstreit recently on Dan Dockich with Don't At Me, saying that he just doesn't care anymore. He's just not going to care about the reaction to how he feels about things. So at least there is, while it may not be balanced, it is certainly closer to, Chad, what you're advocating for than what it was with the examples that you've laid out here. And that's since the new policy came in, 2022, I believe, is whenever ESPN and Pitaro said that they, no more politics. But there's still no repercussions if you do it.
Yeah, and yes, to an extent, I think all that's true. But then you have the Dan Orlovsky story, which is up at OutKick.com right now.
Sure.
Where he tweeted, I think, something like "Protect our daughters," when Khelif was destroying some girl in a boxing match, the Italian, I think it was, when that video posted, and then said this to Barrett Sports Media when asked why moments later he deleted that post. And he said, when you're an employee of a big company, your social media page doesn't just get to be your social media page. That's a fantasy. So you have to represent yourself in the company that you work for in the proper way. He probably heard from someone.
Well,
and someone that felt confident enough to tell Dan Orlovsky, we're not going to weigh into this issue.
Yeah, and I look, I'm totally with you. But
now I think Kirk Herbstreit's at a level where no one's going to tell him anything.
The day we're talking about Amon Khelif, I didn't know how to identify Amon Khelif.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't say man.
Right.
So I understand where Dan Orlovsky's coming from on this.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone hears from someone on this.
Yeah. And look,
because it was a crazy story.
Kirk Herbstreit hasn't recanted anything he said to Dan Dockich.
Right.
So
but there's no lawsuit
different
coming
media
to
personalities
Kirk Herbstreit.
play by different rules.
But, Amon Khelif has since filed lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, there is a lot of confusion with that story, even though I'm with Riley Gaines on the fact that the XY chromosome is male. So, but going into the story, not transgender, claiming it was not intersex. Again, the whole backstory with it was bizarre. And if not for that test by the Russian organization in 2023, we wouldn't have known any of this because Amon Khelif would not have failed the genetic test. in order to qualify to continue to fight in that world championship.
Well, and maybe this lawsuit.
You see what I'm saying, though?
Maybe this lawsuit will force what I would be doing if I were Khelif and I believed all this to be false. Do a test.
Well,
and
sure.
maybe this will force their hand on doing a test.
But
that camp
didn't have to do a test. It's like, but because she won gold.
Yeah.
She already passed the test of the IOC, is what I'm saying.
Point being, if I knew that to be false and you thought people were making things up about me, then I would do whatever I could to. I would just take every test imaginable and say, yeah.
But the initial reaction was, this is a transgender man fighting against women. And a lot of people ended up doing exactly what Dan Orlovsky did.
It just...
And I said it to Davey that day. I said it on the air that whenever we started, I have no idea how to identify other than say competitor based on the list of things that either the competitor was saying they were not, or the list of things I had no idea whether or not I could definitively say one way or the other about the gender of a person. It is so bizarre how the companies will handle certain things and aspects versus let other things go. And in this case, you pointed out great examples through ESPN.
Yeah. By the way, I should point out exactly what Michele Tafoya said about Mina Kimes. She posted on X with the story from OutKick about Kimes. And the story was one, I believe, from Bobby Barack. And it says, ESPN suspended stage deal for breaking its ban on politics for a discussion on an outside podcast. Mina Kimes just advocated for Tim Walz on an outside podcast. We asked ESPN why only Sage was suspended. Head of ESPN PR wouldn't comment. That was the post. And then the story from Bobby Barack. Michele Tafoya reposted that, like I reposted Alex Kirshner, saying, I am sincerely embarrassed for Mina Kimes. And how pathetic that her kind of, quote, masculinity means more than the candidate's record, which is abysmal. Sincerely, a Minnesotan.
Yeah.
Michele Tafoya living in Minnesota. And
back.
That's what, when Kushner came back with the awful announcing story about it, which the awful announcing story is very slanted in favor of Mina Kimes and not Michele Tafoya, which, again, is no accident and no surprise to anyone, but said the only mistake that Mina Kimes made was assuming that by saying that this isn't political, that it would be taken as something not political, and that someone was going to take it as being political.
See, exactly. But it was political.
Of course it is.
Of course. I mean, the low-hanging fruit would be to say, she started all this by saying it's not political.
If I went on any podcast and I answered a question by saying, what I'm going to say is not political, but here are the qualities in Donald Trump I admire. That's political.
But if you say, hey,
here's why I think J.D. Vance is an American hero and Hillbilly Elegy is the greatest movie on Netflix of all time. Let me tell you why. But this is not political at all. I'm just going to tell you why these guys are awesome. That's political, Mina.
Chad,
you can say it's not political, but I think this brand of masculinity is very important right now.
If you start any comment by saying no offense, but.
Exactly.
And then you offend someone.
You're a tool.
Can you?
No offense, but you're a tool.
No offense. Yeah, but can you then come back and say, hey, but I said no offense. Didn't mean to offend. I wasn't trying to offend you. I've already admitted that. Right. So you can't be offended. You can't take it as an offense.
I get mad at like the back and forth of this, and Alex Kirshner, who we've had a respectful back and forth on X or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think Alex Kirshner, he should be able to do whatever he wants in college football, by the way. And he could say whatever he wants on social media. I just get mad at this Michele Tafoya is now going to make a living by making fun of liberals or doing that. This is exactly what most people in media do all the time with conservatives. And I don't even bat an eye at it because it's so damn common. I don't sit there and like, oh, boy, that really surprised me that happened. It's only a surprise now that some liberal media members get made fun of also, and they don't like it.
Well,
and then they all jump in to protect each other.
But, okay, let's go back to the top of the rule book here as to why it's, why OutKick's even asking ESPN for comment on this. It's because they have a zero politics policy.
By the way, totally fair question from Bobby Barack to them. Why was this person suspended for an outside podcast and this person got political on another one and there's nothing?
Right. But see, I'm all for if you're going to let it happen, let it happen on both sides of this.
Yeah.
So if it was a story, McAfee had Dana White on, and we discussed it on the show. It was surprising that ESPN on their air had the advocate of Dana White for Donald Trump during the RNC on to discuss the former president and the candidate. So, like, again, nothing happened there to McAfee. Nothing will. We haven't seen any discipline to Pat McAfee, who doesn't have a boss. Stephen A. Smith, again, he on his own podcast through YouTube is on there discussing Kamala Harris and the silence. We haven't heard from her. Why? Why the silence? It's time to speak after 3 weeks from Joe Biden stepping out of the presidential campaign. Kirk Herbstreit can certainly say what he wants, right? Like,
Yeah.
as long as we're not going to see one side of the opinion suspended.
Well, it's
Or if you have a zero tolerance policy,
Absolutely.
then you have to go about it in a fair way.
From a management perspective, I totally agree. You got to take one course of action and proceed with it on all sides, regardless of the situation. I absolutely agree with that. I hate this, and this what gets back to Kirshner's post to me. I hate the concept or idea that because you're conservative or you espouse conservative ideals on social media, you also have to forfeit your sports career. Or now you have to go into this box. You have to be in this box at all times. Well, why? Because Mina Kimes doesn't have to be in the political box at all times. She still gets to talk about NFL draft prospects or go on and talk about NFL things.
Well, it goes back
on ESPN, on a major
I agree with
media
you
company.
as long as you agree with me.
Right, but you see my point.
That's
like, it's okay to dabble in both if you're left.
That's what I'm saying.
You can go on and do this if you're left, but if you're right, you got to go on all right. This is what I think is encouraging about McAfee and Herbstreit and others. Those dudes are voting for Trump. They may not come out and say it on ESPN. I'm here to tell you, I 100% believe they are Trump guys. And they do it by who they interview. That's how they show it. Kind of how they, all these things, right? But if they say that, that should never be a death sentence for their sports career because of who they vote for.
Right.
You see my point?
Sure, yes.
Like, I don't care if they're good. And I'd say the same about Mina Kimes also, or Bomani Jones, or L. Duncan, or Malika Andrews, or anyone. But I just hate how there's this idea with a lot of media members that, well, now Michele Tafoya does this, so she has to do this, and she could never cover the NFL again because of that. Well, why?
Yeah.
I mean, others get to cover the NBA and do both.
It's the same. If you
I want the same rules for everyone.
Well,
I don't want special treatment.
And unfortunately, we're always going to have the group that wants the Kansas City Chiefs to comment and suspend Harrison Butker.
Right.
But it's not the same reaction for something else off the field that took place by another player.
If you spoke out against the Roe versus Wade being overturned in the NFL, then no one's asking for comment from the team about someone doing that. That's my issue with all of this. Is you can do everything as long as you're left.
That's what I'm saying.
And then if you're right, well, you better just go right, or you better not say a word at all about it. Pat McAfee, Kirk Herbstreit, Dan Orlovsky, I don't want to hear about you protecting women's sports.
Right.
ESPN doesn't want that. That's too political. Dan Orlovsky's good at what he does. Dan Orlovsky can leave that post out there forever, and he could go on a Joe Rogan experience and talk about all the great qualities of Donald Trump. I wouldn't care. And no one else should either. If we're going to play that game, it's got to be 100% and not just this constant back and forth with it and so much hypocrisy shown by so many people. It wears me out.
Well, and they can say it and know they can get away with it with ESPN.
Yes.
Just like McAfee and Stephen A. and Herbstreit.
Now, and we've had Michele Tafoya on the show. We will again. Tafoya's case is different in that this is what she chose.
Sure.
I really believe, like she said, I don't want to be silent anymore. I'm very in her spots. I want to get into politics. That's great. But
she wanted to be able to speak what she's saying.
That's also a true believer. Right? Like if Mina Kimes leaves ESPN to go work for Kamala Harris's campaign and campaigns for Harris and Waltz, then she's a true believer.
Well,
also.
But
my point is, boy, that's a brave step to leave a great gig in sports media and want to go get into that world and do that.
But here's the
something
difference.
totally different.
But here's the difference. Mina Kimes can do it while at ESPN.
Yes.
Michele Tafoya wasn't doing that with NBC.
No, and she knew she couldn't.
So we wouldn't have seen this type of response while with Sunday Night Football.
Right.
That's where I'm saying.
And knew
but
she couldn't get away with it.
You know you can get away with it with ESPN.
Yeah.
And now you know you can get away with it on both sides of this.
But
how can you not take it that way?
But Dan Orlovsky, with that quote, and again, the quote from Dan Orlovsky, when you're an employee of a big company, your social media page doesn't just get to be your social media page. That's a fantasy, so you have to represent yourself and the company that you work for in the proper way. I firmly believe he was told something by a boss. Someone called him, someone said something and said, take it down. I wish there would have been a similar reaction from one of the bosses of Courtney Lyle and Carolyn Peck, Elle Duncan, or Malika Andrews on what they did on ESPN air in that situation. If there is a mandate about no politics and anything that wades in those waters, I would want something. I don't want them fired. I would want something said or done to them.
But
also.
in the
interest of fairness.
case of the moment of silence on the broadcast, that is a production decision.
Yes.
People in the truck know that's coming. You're setting this up.
Makes it even nuttier.
Yes.
The whole thing.
Agreed.